Good morning, Biology 102. Today I'd like to talk about some of the components of biodiversity and ways that humans threaten biodiversity. So first off, biodiversity has three components to it. When we talk about biodiversity and how biodiverse an area is, we are talking about the diversity, the variety and types of biomes or ecosystems in a particular area. We are also talking about the number and variety of species, especially keystone species like this coral reef picture that I show in the background here. And we are also talking about genetic variation and how sort of diverse the genes are within a population or a group of organisms. All three of these things build biodiversity and really allow scientists to say how biodiverse an area is. Now, humans have many different kinds of threats to biodiversity. I want to talk about 5 different ways that humans threaten biodiversity, starting with habitat destruction and loss. This is typically viewed as the number one threat currently to biodiversity and just our ecosystems and variety and types of species and genetic diversity that we see on planet Earth. So, ways that humans destroy habitat. You can imagine that deforestation, like my picture over here, shows habitat like sort of being taken away, and then overlogging, taking too many resources, etc., clears an area and leaves very little habitat left for other living things. Replacing grasslands with farms has happened historically across the United States and in other parts of the world. Anytime we build roads through national parks or through habitat that is undisturbed, then we fragment it or split it into isolated sort of separate areas. And this can have some damage as well. Another way to fragment or split an area, an aquatic area, is by building a dam in a river. Sometimes that will split upstream and downstream of a river and then sort of split up or isolate two pieces of habitat for fish and aquatic organisms. Filling in wetlands has been a popular thing that we've done with urbanization, and so as cities have sprawled outwards, filling in wetlands so that we can build malls and housing and whatever the needs of the humans are, then this has been very, very common. So there's a lot of loss of wetlands. And finally, another way is mining. Strip mining or pit mining, dredging, where we like sort of take off the bottom layer of an aquatic system. These kinds of things can also destroy habitat. So all of these things destroy our habitat, not only for us and the natural spaces that we like to enjoy, but also the habitat and niches for the different living things in a particular area. The second way that I want to sort of mention that we threaten biodiversity is through urbanization. So the UN estimated in 2007 that our global population suddenly, over half of the global population was suddenly living in urban areas. So over 4 billion people living in very densely collected urban cities and places like that within the world. As these urban areas have grown, they have sprawled outward, eating up more and more of the natural habitat as they sort of go. Over here is a picture of green urban development that we'll talk about in our next video clip, but you can see that lots of urban development plans are now including natural spaces. And so rather than sort of sprawling and having this urbanization have habitat conversion for human use, rather than sprawling outward, lots of cities want to build upward and include green spaces in their plans. So this is another way that humans are kind of influencing habitat and kind of using it up in these very densely populated cities. The third thing I want to mention is introduced and invasive species. So humans, as we move about the globe, we often carry along with us in our baggage, on our clothes, and on our person, different species as we sort of move from one location to the next. Introduced species are species that humans have moved from their native ranges to a new location on planet Earth, so a new geographic region. Usually in those regions, they don't have predators or diseases that will hunt them them. And so sometimes these introduced species can turn into what we call an invasive species. This is an introduced species that has the tendency to grow rapidly in number, expanding its population very, very quickly, and causes harm to its new environment. Down here I show a picture of a cane toad, and you might have heard of a cane toad before. Cane toads were introduced from the Americas into the South Pacific, and they were introduced because they would eat a sugar cane beetle and increased sugar cane production. However, these particular toads in Australia and the South Pacific Islands that they were introduced have rapidly grown in number and taken off. They have some like sort of glands that release some toxins, so lots of snakes in Australia and other places cannot eat them. There's no predators that can get them and sort of control their numbers or diseases, and so they've taken off. And when I lived in the Solomon Islands as a Peace Corps volunteer, I couldn't even cross this field to get to my classroom when it was raining without getting cane toads stuck in the bottom of my flip-flop or stepping on them. They were so numerous. And so this caused all kinds of problems. So introduced invasive species can cause a lot of harm and really change and disturb communities where they're introduced. The fourth thing I want to mention is overpopulation of humans causes overexploitation. So our human population is about 7.8 billion people at present. You can see the diagram over here of the density of the human population. And as the human numbers grow, we are over-harvesting, overfishing, over-hunting, taking more resources than what can replenish over time. And so overexploitation is that idea where you take something and you diminish the supply until it almost runs short and the returns cannot come back, right? And so this overexploitation or taking too many resources from planet Earth is causing lots of populations to fail or to struggle to survive. And along with the habitat destruction, these two things are quite influential to the other living things within a particular space. The last thing I want to mention are some pollution events. So humans, as we grow in number, are also polluting our environments, and this impacts and threatens biodiversity. So you've probably heard of global climate change. This is caused by greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide, CO2, or methane, CH4, stacking up next to the Earth's surface and then trapping heat, almost like a blanket or a greenhouse next to the Earth's surface. And this causes global climate changes, either melting of ice caps and raising of sea levels, to different kinds of rain patterns and things like that around different areas. And this causes lots of species that are on the edge and have very specific niches to struggle, right? Like polar bears and things like that. As their sea ice melts, they have less sort of hunting grounds to hunt seals. And so they are struggling to sort of maintain their numbers because of this global climate change. Eutrophication is the idea. It's a freshwater problem, so freshwater aquatic problem, where different fertilizers or sewage runs off into lake streams and different freshwater systems, and then causes algal blooms or different producers to bloom in those aquatic systems. The problem with this is as those algae die, they often, the decomposition of them often uses up oxygen, and so all the other organisms die. So you'll get a lake or a stream that is covered in algae or covered in a producer of some sort with nothing else living in the system. So it represents an aquatic imbalance. Bioaccumulation and biological magnification is when humans release toxins that can bioaccumulate or accumulate inside of our tissues over time. And biomagnification is where then these toxins that have accumulated can move up the food chain and accumulate in greater and greater concentrations as we move up the food chain. One example of this is bald eagles and DDT and other raptor groups. DDT is a pesticide that was sprayed at kind of the turn of the century to mid-century, and it would control insect populations and different populations of pests, right, around fields and whatnot. But it also was taken into different groups like fish and, insects and fish, and it magnified or moved up food chains so that raptors were accumulating great loads of this DDT. And then they were struggling to make proper eggs and fledge young. So this DDT caused this eggshell thinning in these raptor groups. And so their numbers started to fall because of it. So this is a way that we see sort of toxins moving through populations and sticking around and causing damage. Acid rain, another sort of contributor to like sort of air pollution and things like that, is when we burn some of our fossil fuels like coal. It releases sulfur oxides and other nitrogen sulfur compounds that can turn in and mix with precipitation or water in the atmosphere and come back down as acid rain or acid precipitation. That acid can collect in freshwater systems. It can harm young plants and destroy like sort of fish fry and young sort of aquatic plants and animals as well. There are a number of different coolants and freons that sort of are made with and release CFCs or chlorofluorocarbons that also get into our atmosphere and cause O3 or ozone to be like destroyed. And ozone protects and blankets the earth from different kinds of UV light. There are other pollution events like releasing oil spills. You've probably heard of like the BP oil spill and Valdez oil spill. So there are other pollution events that can cause harm as well. So these are the top 5 ways that I wanted to mention that humans impact their environments and especially threaten biodiversity. So I will see you next time. Next time we're going to focus on what should we do about these problems? What are some conservation solutions to these problems? So see you next time.